microphone monitor, so we're on our own. So I'll start with roll call. And I see Phil Barnhart, I see Amy, I see David, I see me, I see Philip. Josh is here. And Susie is not gonna be here tonight. Ruth is here. And Sarah is here, Sherry is here, Eugene is here. Anybody heard from Franny? Well, there she is. And Kate is not gonna make it, and Carl is here. So you have the agenda in front of you. Our goal tonight, I have it written right at the top of my paper, is to wrap up the formula funds. It's really time to get this to LTD. And so we're gonna dive right into that. Is there any audience participation? Seeing none, I'm gonna move to the next agenda item. And Kate's gonna talk with us a little bit about sub-allocation.
All right, so really quickly, I wanted to talk to you all that part of the STIF rules say that the qualified entity has to work with public transportation service providers to come up with a sub-allocation method. Which I think in some regions is clearer than others, because in some there's very set, like this provider provides to this geography, this provider provides to this geography. So in ours it's a little bit different because we had people for in-district, out-of-district, so we worked with public transportation service providers in the fall and decided to do that, sub-allocate the out of area so that there was the west side and the east side based on the county commissioner districts. We talked about this a little bit last time. And then when we had providers submit projects for inside the LTD boundary, then we went ahead and used that same formula for inside the LTD boundary too. So we are still using the county commissioner districts. This is really just a way for you all to start out to kind of think about the way the funding is generated. It's one of the things you're thinking about when you're thinking about how the money is split out. And it's a little bit, to Amy's question today, I don't know if everyone saw Amy's email today, but so I just wanted to address it right at the beginning, that it's with our particular project requests, most of this, especially inside the boundary, can't be broken up in these geographic regions. Because if you look at like what most of the projects are, many of them are kind of within the whole LTD boundary. So there's the student fare pass program, there's the low income pass. There's right now the more general knowledge that there will be service expansion, but it hasn't been geographically framed yet, which is partially how ODOT has suggested that we do that request. There's the staffing to administer this, that's clearly countywide. So I just wanted you all to know that this is a little bit partly what ODOT has done because it's statewide. They have to think about it for different regions, and then they've given us a lot of flexibility to think about how this breakout happens. And so I think for us it's not quite as clear as it would have been in other areas. So hope that somewhat addresses your question, Amy, that you had today over email. And then
I think so. What about the out of district?
The out of district is more clear, okay. I think. Yeah. And so, and I had those percentages, and it will just take me a minute to find them, but yeah. I can pull them out for you. But I will. That will probably take me a minute because they're somewhere.
So, while Kate's looking at that, I think we'll move on. And I'd like to. Was there a question?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to start with the out of district providers coming up and talking with us about any changes that you've made since the last time we met. So whoever wants to go first, jump right up here and talk with us.
Kelly, can you do that?
So that's page 26 and 27.
Or Kelly just wanted to say one thing, yeah.
And Representative Barnhart has directed us to pages 26 and 27 in the packet.
My name is Kelly Clark. I'm a transportation planner with the Lake Council of Governments. And I don't have any specific changes to the application that I've submitted, but I would like to mention that the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla, their STIF committee has committed, or at least supported the request for $20,000 per year for the Florence to Eugene route, along with the use of their bus. And so just wanted to let you all know that, and it's another step towards implementing that project.
So we've been able to collaborate and combine resources to come up with a
Yes.
package that works.
That's right. That's right. And they're another public transportation service provider. So it's again looking at how can we spread our our services across public transportation service providers and collaborate and make these rural transit routes work.
Great. Thanks.
We submitted applications to the STIF intercommunity statewide pot of money for both the Florence to Eugene route and the Florence to HOTS route as well to continue that pilot along. So
Good.
those are moving forward.
So is that it on the out of district? Are there any, John, come on up.
Thank you. So per the committee's direction, we moved $95,000 from the Rhodey Express expansion from the 100% list to the 130% list. Part of the intention of that is the overall budget is an estimate both on our part of projected expenditures as well as estimated revenues that may come up through tax receipts. The $95,000 change is an approximately 25% reduction. Assuming that 100% of tax receipts come in instead of the 130% list, we would adjust or prorate hours accordingly for the Rhodey Express expansion. So core service is funded through another process. It would be an approximate 25% reduction of the overall frequency of the proposed expanded hours, subject to negotiation with the contractor. So again, these are just estimates that would eventually need to be negotiated through contract, but overall we would look to be approximately a 25% reduction in proposed expansion service.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So my impression the last time we met is that we were this close to approving out of district. And I'm hoping that these comments have resolved outstanding questions and that we're now this close to approving the out of district projects. I guess I'm ready for a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
This may not be the right time, but let me just point out that all of these revenue estimates that we're working from are just exactly that, estimates. And they're based, I am certain, although we haven't actually been told what they're based on specifically, I'm quite sure they're based on the understanding of the economic activity in the district and in the state of Oregon. If you have a tax income based on payroll, it depends on the size of the payroll. I think one of the things that at least the board needs to understand is what happens in the event that the payroll results don't reach what the estimates are, and therefore what changes they might need to make in the plan in order to stick within what's actually available. I have no idea whether that's part of our charge or not, but it's something that at least the board needs to have thought about in the event that they face that possibility. And I'm acutely aware of the fact that the great economists in the United States, who of course predict 10 out of the last 3 recessions, are telling us that next time, or that next year, that this year is going to be fine and probably 2020 will be fine. After that, who knows? I know exactly how much I depend on those predictions, not much,
This coming from a man who knows a little bit about revenue.
a little bit.
Okay,
So, I mean,
well,
it may or may not have anything to do with what we're talking about right now.
So can somebody speak briefly to the plan if the revenue is, if there's a shortfall, Tom?
Well, the place I'd start is, remember all the applications had a priority. And I think if, depending on where the revenue actually came in, we fund as far down that priority list.
If I could, Mr. Chair, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
And that gives guidance to the board as to what they ought to do in that case.
Okay. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Were you gonna say something? Oh. Well, you know, oftentimes, I probably should have had a resolution written up and stuck in the packet, because
So what would you like, Mr.
a
Chair?
motion to approve the out-of-district projects as proposed and forward them to the board.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the out-of-district proposals as contained in the document we have today and forward that to the board.
To the LTD board.
To the LTS, thank you.
Thank you.
The Lane Transit District Board.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Do we have to prioritize them?
They
They've
already
do
been
have-
prioritized.
But that's done,
Well,
isn't it?
it is,
Yeah.
but we have to,
Create our own.
we have the prerogative to change that.
The providers have each prioritized, correct?
Yes,
But we
yeah.
have to prioritize
That's true, that's part of our function.
among those
Okay.
different providers.
So the motion may be premature.
There are two, there's only two,
For out of district?
LCOG and LTD.
Yeah.
So there's not much to prioritize, really.
One's an existing service, one's a new service, so.
Or can,
And they already have, I mean, LCOG's prioritized their first two, and then they'll prioritize their four.
The question is, do we endorse their
Six.
prioritization?
right, and Kate, could we take those priorities and, you know, kind of mix and match, so,
You can do that, yeah. I also did get clarification from ODOT today that once this pot of money is, what I wanted to clarify is if these projects had to be funded in the order that they're prioritized, and they don't have to be. So you all can prioritize them, but then the providers will work together with that pot of money eventually to make sure they get funded in the order that they need to. So I think that's
Phil?
important to keep in mind too.
Is, on the table that we have before us, you know, the total budget dollars, $120,000 in 2019, $276 in 2020, $317,000 in 2021. Do the, since the request came in with different numbers and only $5,000 in the first year, 2019, is that something we need to really concern ourselves with, or is essentially the money's gonna come in and it will be banked for those latter 2 years that kind of exceed that original allocation?
That's correct.
So if the motion were altered to say, in the priority as presented,
I thought that's what I said, but perhaps I didn't. That would be fine.
Sarah?
But the priority that's presented puts LCOG projects ahead of LTD projects, which could be fine, or maybe we wanna discuss that.
Yeah, I see two different rankings. I see a ranking for LCOG projects and a ranking for LTD. I don't see these six
So
as ranked.
presumably-
I don't see a 1 through 6. I see a 1 through 2 and a 1 through 4.
Okay, so presumably 1 and 1 would get funded, and then 2 and 2.
I don't know. To me, we haven't nobody's prioritized these 6 in a 1 through 6, as I've seen them. So I don't know how you fund that.
Okay, so that simple solution won't work.
And that might be the point Amy's trying to make is
Yeah.
we've got 6 projects before us, and are we mandated to suggest an order?
My understanding is that we are.
You're mandated to suggest an order, but I think what I said I got clarification from ODOT today is they're not then mandated necessarily to. They're mandated to use that order as a suggestion, but they won't have to, they don't have to fund all of number 1 before they start funding number 2. Because a lot of these are interconnected, and so you could do what I think someone just suggested of saying all the 1s first, then the 2s, then 3, 4, if you would like to do that.
So, is there a reason we ought to, well, apparently there is a reason. How would we like to prioritize all 6 of the projects? And I would like to suggest that we don't spend a whole lot of time on this. We could spend the rest of the meeting on it. Sherry?
Since they're only really in essence suggestions,
Yeah,
I would feel okay with going with 2 1s, 2 2s, and 3 and 4. And then they're gonna spend the money in the order that they see fit anyway.
okay.
Is that not what I'm hearing?
Would you like to
It's a
offer that as
suggestion.
an
Well, I would just
amendment to the
amend
motion?
Yeah.
the motion that we would prioritize them in the order that they're listed. Is that acceptable? Okay.
The only, well, 1 and 2 from LCOG are about equivalent to 1 cost-wise from LTD, so maybe we just leave the, I don't know, maybe we do 1 and then 2 of LCOG, so that they're both getting 100,000 right off the bat. Maybe it's not.
It seems to me one of the questions is, do we want to fund the skeleton service before we fund expansion or not? And the skeleton service here is Florence to Eugene and Florence to HOTS. And the others are expansion, except arguably the Saturday service from Diamond. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that's a reasonable thing to think about is, do we want to get the system in place at least a little bit, or do we want to do expansion in existing places first?
There's a thought. Comments?
Well, my understanding was that the system couldn't actually work without the expansion vehicle. Was that my understanding?
I'm gonna let Cosette answer that.
That the number one priority, the Florence to Eugene, we needed to have the vehicle.
Yep.
Yeah, what I was talking about was Florence to Eugene and Florence to HOTS as the
Right.
as the pieces that finish the routes.
But those routes can't be finished without a vehicle.
Right.
So aren't they intertwined anyway?
I don't know.
I guess that's my question.
John and then Josh, did you have something to offer?
Oh, well, Yachts is currently in a pilot program and has a vehicle.
Okay.
John, oh, is that what you?
Yeah, that's correct. So we have a dedicated vehicle in place for Florence to HOTS service. For any expansion to Rhodey Express service within the city of Florence, it would require an additional vehicle to be able to increase the frequency of the service.
AJ?
If I may just provide a little bit insight, I was part of the rules Thank you so much. I was part of the Rules Advisory Committee that we pulled when we put this together. The intent was that this committee would be advising on prioritizing the projects. And the way you would prioritize the projects is you would look at the intent of the rules, and I believe we have the draft bylaws, and maybe we can pull them up to see, as you look at the projects, which projects meet the intent. If all of them meet the intent, you're trying to, because there's, ideally, everybody was required to submit like 130%, so more. And, anticipating that if there's more money, that the additional projects would be funded that are beyond the 100%. So if you have 2 1s, basically, and I haven't seen all the applications, so which is great. That means if somebody has a project number 4, that's really a project number 6. So there is a requirement. So when this goes to the LTD, and this committee could prioritize them in whichever way they want. When the LTD Board of Directors has their qualified entity hat, they will be required to submit them in a priority list. And they could either accept your recommendation or reprioritize them at that time. And if they do not accept your recommendation, they must indicate why they do not accept your recommendation. So, so that discussion will happen there if you give 2 of them a 1, 2 of them, because they're gonna have to look at the same criteria that you're looking at and seeing, do they mean the intent of what was required by the bill?
So are those, were you able to find the criteria?
Yep, so they're in your packet.
Oh, okay.
Yep, they're on page,
And it's
Sarah.
page 3 and 4.
And it's listed with each project,
Oh, okay.
how many of the criteria they meet, and projects 11 and 12, the LCOG projects meet 3 each versus Rhodey Express meeting 1. Of course, you know, do they better meet those 3 or what? I don't know. We're not doing a good job.
And hopefully that helped you.
So we have some, Eugene,
Could somebody read me the list? 'Cause I can't read
the
it.
the four projects?
Yeah. Then 1 through 6, till
Yeah,
the
the
end,
six, okay, yeah.
what the numbers are.
Do that if you'd like.
So, do we have them all on one sheet of paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
page 26, so it's probably the
Okay,
easiest.
so, there's the Florence to Eugene,
That's number 1, right?
yeah. Well, that's number 1 for one set, for LCOG.
That's Elcock's.
Number 2 for LCOG is Florence to Yahat. And then number 1 for, what's the other group?
LTD.
LTD, out of district, is the Rhodey Express. Number 2 for LTD is the Rhodey Express expansion. Oh, those are
Sorry,
two
yeah.
expansion vehicles.
No,
One should be
it's-
expansion vehicle and one should be expansion
You wanna look
service.
at the
Okay.
project column on the far left.
All right,
What is one? This is correct.
okay.
One of them's by a
okay.
bus.
Yeah, so one of them is vehicles, the other is service. Then there's the Diamond Express service,
Yeah, and then the Diamond Express Saturday.
Saturday.
Saturday, that's
Yeah.
right. So that's all 6 of them.
Yeah, okay.
Phil?
Can I ask you a question, and this may be, Cosette, maybe you can answer this, but the Rhodey Express rolling stock, is that a standard conventional vehicle, or is it powered by natural gas, electricity, or other low or no emission propulsion?
It's a standard
Okay.
gas
So,
line.
so that's why it didn't trigger that in the kind of criteria scoring. Okay, thanks.
So do we have preferences in how we prioritize these 6? One
So-
suggestion was to take the 2 ones and,
Well, so I would modify that then to say, why don't we do the 1, 2, and then just add the LTD, starting with 3, 4, 5, 6. In that order.
So the order they're in now, but just.
Right, but just change the numbers for our providing priorities, change the 1 to a 3, and the 4, 5, and 6.
so in the order they're listed, and we just
Right.
change the numbers.
Right.
What's
the proposal?
what's
I
our
like that.
rationale for that?
Well, the rationale for that for me is that we're looking at an established, well, I guess the LTD Rhodey Express is established as well, but expanding, I don't know, you come up with some rationale.
My concern is if we put LTD first and Elcock second, then Elcock.
No, we're doing
No,
LCOG first.
But if it was listed the opposite, Elcock would go from 1 and 2 to 5 and 6.
Right.
And that's completely random.
I-
I mean,
I
Sarah?
think it's worth leaving them as they are because they meet more criterion.
Yes.
The LCOG projects meet 3 criterion each versus the.
So there you go,
that's
rationale.
good, that's what I was looking for, is
That's what I was.
Something that makes sense.
That one I agree with, okay.
I would also say that the first 2 projects, I think they leverage other funds as well, right? I don't know if that would be a
They do,
justification.
yeah.
I'm supportive of Sherry's
Yeah.
proposal then.
Okay,
Just want to
so,
understand it.
what's being discussed is to keep these in the order that they're printed here. Change the Rhodey Express rolling stock to 3 and then go 4, 5, 6 down from there. And so is there a friendly amendment to the main motion?
That's fine with me.
Okay, it's okay with the 2 motion makers. So we do have a motion on the floor, thank heavens. Is there any other discussion? So we have a motion to approve out of district projects and contained in that motion is the priority. I'm getting ready to ask for a vote. Speak now.
Yeah, I'll just make one comment.
All
I'm
right.
gonna go along with the good of the order here, and that makes sense, and all of these obviously can be funded, so let's hope to goodness that,
Well-
you know, it is. I personally would probably put the Rhodey Express rolling stock as maybe the first of all priority projects, because it provides an existing service, it allows it to continue, it probably has the greatest number of people that it serves for the greatest good of a single community, to me, that probably is, of all 6 of these projects, the one that is most important to the greatest number of people. And expanding new service or providing new service, I think is great, but I would personally put that as my top priority. I'll go along with the, the good of the order for, sake of consensus.
Eugene?
I would put the Florence to Eugene run as number 1, but I'm not sure about the Florence HOTS. I think I would put the Rotary Express or the Diamond Express actually above them. But again, like you, for the good of the order, I'm not gonna argue too much, but.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go ahead and call for the vote, and I'll do a roll call vote, so that everybody can express their individual opinion. A yes vote will be to vote for the motion to accept the projects as proposed in the order that they're printed on the paper. Phil Barnhart?
Aye.
Amy?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Phil Farrington?
Yes.
Josh?
I think I'm gonna stand out on this one.
All right, okay. Ruth?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Sherry?
I appreciate what was said about those, and I just wanted to say, because they're asking for a small amount of money for that expansion vehicle, I'm assuming again that they're going to be funded, so my vote is yes.
Eugene?
Yes.
And my vote is yes as well. Franny and Carl don't vote,
We don't vote.
so that motion passes. That was easy.
Oh, was it?
We have about a half an hour to do the LTD projects. Carl?
And as the person who's on the board, I've heard the concerns, so, and the issues, so I can
Thanks.
bring that with me.
You can communicate that
Yes.
back to your board colleagues. Thank you. So we have, I take it that there are no changes, or were there changes to the LTD?
Yes. I'm just gonna talk for a minute.
Andrew?
Hi, do we have a slide?
Yeah.
So there were just a couple of changes. We updated the totals right after we submitted the original applications. ODOT updated the 100% amount, so we changed our applications to reflect that. In doing that, I realized that there was a slight error in the hours, miles, and rides we were reporting for our fixed route service. Small change. Basically what happens is because we're projecting that we will provide additional MX service, fixed route service, and additional paratransit service related to that. As you can imagine, we get different amounts of miles, hours, and rides out of all 3 of those services. So we made a kind of a small model just using productivities, how fast those buses typically go, the number of rides we can do. I updated the totals in those and realized that in how we were shifting funds around before, they weren't exactly right, but the new totals reflect the correct 100% amount. And I believe you got something with those totals on them. They're not drastically different. The $200,000 was put into, I think it's 200,000, yeah, 278,000 was put into just more fixed route service in the later years of our application. And as you can imagine, it's meaningful, but it's not a huge amount relative to the original ask. And then I think that was it. Yeah, so the new numbers are up there, but that was our only change.
Ruth?
And so for the increased amount requested by Southland Wheels for a transportation development plan, we counseled with LCOG and realized we so lowballed our budget that we wouldn't have satisfied the requirements for full development of the plan. So after further advisement and research, they recommended that we work with a $100,000 budget for the project, and that's why it was increased.
Thank you. So I think what I'll do is ask if there are questions or thoughts about the overall list of projects. And then before I ask for a motion, we'll have the whole priority conversation as well. Sherry?
So I presented this information from the last meeting to the Springfield City Council, and I did get some comments. And one of them was questioning the administrative amount that was requested. And I was not sure how much of that went, is there out of that LCOG funds as well? Or is it, you know, sort of how is it broken down? The questions said, you know, they couldn't imagine $280,000 to administer the program. So I guess I'm asking, how would we imagine $280,000 as administrative funds rather than adding to services? So some justification, if we could.
Yes. What we did is we estimated 75,000 per year would go to LCOG. LCOG would assist LTD in administering, assist some of the reporting, reconciling some of these meetings, all their staff time, preparation. But in addition to that, some of the projects that LTD submitted require extensive amount of administration. The low-income program and the youth fair program are labor-intensive projects that will require a lot to administer. Mobility on Demand is another project that doing that project requires significant amount of staff. And what other project was in there, I think, that we thought was the student, the low-income pass were heavy lifts, the mobility as a service, all those partnerships. So we know that that's gonna be significantly staff intensive. So what we did is we put in what we estimated by meeting what we felt.
Okay, so my question is, if I'm looking at the student fare cost, that's just for the student fare, that you didn't include administrative costs in that?
No, that's just, yeah, those projects are what we know will subsidize youth fare. And the low income went from, we currently subsidize $250,000 to $750,000 per year. And none of that funds includes administrative cost in administering those. And we know that that program will be a heavy lift.
Okay, so if I may ask my second question then. The other question had to do with the rolling stock, project number 3. The question being, do you not have a budget to replace those already? And if so, or if not, what were you going to do if this, I mean, what happens if these funds had not been provided? So I guess justifying the rolling stock request.
Yes, so we have a fleet replacement program in which how we replace our large vehicles. LTD does not receive enough federal funding to be able to replace its vehicles. So because of that, we run buses that are supposed to be on the road for about 12 years to about 18 years. And the cost of doing that is really high. In addition to that, older vehicles tend to have less environmentally acceptable technology or lack of. So the goal would be that these dollars will assist us in being able to replace fleets and also expand our fleet to meet the additional service requirements. I believe our project number 1 was expansion of bus service, and that bus service will directly be deployed during our peak times. So that means all our fleet's already out right now, and we need additional buses because at the same time that our kind of working people's peak is when kids are getting out of school and doing their activities. So we actually have to expand our fleet in addition to what we're doing. So And to do that, we will preliminary continue to run older vehicles until we can replace those vehicles. So we're even running even older vehicles than what we probably should have out on the road, and at higher cost.
So one other, I'm sorry, take all this time.
These are
but,
great questions. These are great.
Well, you know, I got nailed by her. These are from the council members. So the other question has to do with the general service and where might we be able to have some input about where that general service is increased? Or is there a place where that?
There is a place. Transit Tomorrow is actually directly informing this project. So we are using the Transit Tomorrow analysis of our entire service area to inform a lot of the deployment. Our initial deployment will be to support, as I stated, the youth, that we know there are going to be increased need to serve the youth. But after that, we will restructure our entire service in a plan based on the results of Transit Tomorrow, is whatever the community currently is discussing. So, and that will guide the future of how LTD deploys its service.
Thank you.
Eugene.
I have a question. If the administration is not included in the sum for the youth, for example, if that gets funded and the administration doesn't, you're gonna have this huge program with no administration, right?
Yes, and what normally would happen to that is we've got to get the money, so it just becomes a shuffling game. We basically take it from the general fund and then reduce general fund service to, so it creates a shuffling game, and it doesn't create the transparency that's really needed in a program like this to state, if you're going to increase that much service, you're going to add a new service criteria, mobility on demand, you're going to add all these programs. Instead of shuffling the money around, it's best to be transparent about what you expect your administrative costs to be in administering them. That way it's clear where those dollars are being spent, and we track, as required by the rules, that administration. So in the event that staff does not spend their time in the program, we would then not charge the program. So we are required by the rules to maintain an accounting that is available for auditing by the state of how we spend those dollars.
Is that anything else, Eugene?
No.
Freddie?
So I figured it out, it's about 680,000 into 13,115,000, it's about 19%. And my question is, it looks like, does the admin is all coming from in-district, it's also supporting out-of-district, because you said you're giving LCOG 75,000, and they're doing the out-of-district admin.
Correct. So they're doing both, and also helping us with the discretionary. So it's all coming from one pot. Instead of breaking it out, and because it's one out of district, and also the discretionary dollars that they're working on. And again, this is for the first application for the first 2 years of funding. You would anticipate efficiencies as time goes on, but costs to go up. So the goal would be in the future to not have net gain in administration, that as you absorb the increases in cost by improving your efficiencies, because you definitely want to make sure that your administration is not growing.
You're setting up.
Yes.
There's a little bit more cost when you're setting up.
Correct.
Sarah?
I don't know how involved you were in the prioritization, but I'm curious, along with what Eugene was asking, why the STIF program administration goes below a reserve fund. The reserve, project number 5 is the Sustainable Services Reserve, and project number 6 is the program administration.
The reason for that is we felt protected. Once you implement new service, you don't want to cut it. That's a higher priority. And so that's the way we prioritize that, is protecting any services that we implement. You know, we had to rank them, we couldn't kind of put them side by side. But what we wanted to show is that once the district is committed to implementing a program, we're committed to keeping it. And we cannot predict the economy. And we would hate to add service and add programs for 2 years and the very next year come back and have less dollars and now we're not funding it. So we had to prioritize that and thought we're gonna have to figure it out.
Then I have David and Phil Farrington.
So, AJ, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you answered a question I came prepared to ask today, so I want to restate this and tell me if I got this right. But my understanding of Project 1, increased bus services, Project 3, the rolling stock, and some of the other priorities, staff has taken into account the Moving Ahead project and the Transit Tomorrow in terms of making these requests. And if as those projects evolve, these funds will be available to fund aspects of those projects. Is
That is exactly correct. Yes, we're not going to be, we don't have this separate plan. That is the whole purpose of Transit Tomorrow and the Moving Ahead and all of those. But the key point being that these services do have to be deployed, especially in areas, as I think the first meeting we discussed, to increase and provide additional access to households of low income and the youth. So that's where our main targeted area has been, and Transit Tomorrow really addresses those areas as well.
These are running on parallel tracks, not.
Yes.
Thank you.
Phil Farrington.
So the table that we have up on the screen here shows Project 5, Task 1 Reserve Fund, Project 6, the Program Administration, Task 1 Reserve Fund. But if I'm understanding what you were...
That's just an error.
That's an, yeah,
Okay.
one's a reserve.
I think, yeah, sometimes the.
Okay, so we're actually that Task 1 under the Program Administration is not a reserve fund. It's actually the money deployed to
Right.
be able to
My
staff
fault.
all of these projects that we're talking about. In that respect, would you not consider Project 6 to be of a higher priority than the reserve fund for Project 5? Because obviously, you can't do 1 through 4 unless you have the funding also under that Project 6. Am I hearing that right? You need that staff to be able to
We do,
administer all
and
the
what I will say is again, it's what we were challenged with, is which one did we prioritize first? And we knew we would be accountable to the public, to you guys, and that you guys would provide us those questions. And we thought that you guys would be really worried that if we added the services and then didn't protect them. So we just kind of made our best guess as to what we felt you guys would think of that. But of course, yes, we want to be able to have the staffing to be able to support those programs. So, you know, we tossed them back and forth and said, well, what looks more responsible to put it in order? So we just did it based on trying to do the right thing.
I've got Kate and then David.
I just want to say one thing really quick about that, and I think this is what I was trying to say earlier about the prioritization, is that the prioritization won't happen so that all of 1 gets funded and then all of 2 gets funded. So I think that you can also think about it in terms of, you know, they can.
Proportionately?
Yes, a little bit, so.
David?
And it doesn't say under Project 5 what the reserves are set up for, but if they're, under Project 5, if we reserved the funds and it was a general reserve, couldn't we use the reserves in General 5 to fund the administrative costs in number 6, once the reserve had been established? So I mean, I like the order for that reason, because I think it gives you flexibility by putting the reserve ahead of the administration costs, again, assuming the reserve is not a restricted reserve, it's a general reserve. I think it gives you more flexibility.
It's kind of an odd way of doing prioritization with reserve funds and admin, I think. I mean, like, what the Oregon Transportation Commission does is they take money off the top, and they say, okay, here's reserve, here's administration. And then they prioritize what's left.
Yeah.
Because that throws in the argument, what's more important, reserve or administration, I mean,
Right.
you know? So maybe that's really the best way to do it, I mean, it's just a suggestion.
Eugene.
And when I've had experience working with budgets and grants, we always folded the administrative costs into the project cost, so that you didn't have a separate administrative section. It was just understood that you had to have administration in order to run a program.
Other comments?
I kind of think this was set to keep things transparent, and that's why it's in the
Yeah.
order that it is.
Especially when you look at the subsidy for the youth program and the low-income program. Had we added our administrative cost, it would have not shown what the true output to the community would have been, what the benefits. So we really kind of separate that out. So there was an accounting of how this money would directly serve. If not, that number would have been inflated, and then you don't know, it starts getting fuzzy. What are we really subsidizing and what are we paying internal staff to do? So
I understand that.
And then on the vehicle, staff did want me to point out that, especially for the large vehicles, fixed route buses, our goal is to use our STIF dollars to match our federal grants, so that we maximize those dollars.
So, we've had sort of a general conversation, just to get a sense of the room. How are folks feeling about these projects, in terms of, is this a list of projects that you can support with the prioritization question set aside? Can I get a little straw poll?
Yeah.
So generally, we think we're on the right track with this project, so the rest of our conversation, let's devote to prioritizing. Sherry?
I'll just say, I appreciate the South Lane. You saw that the 40,000 that you had suggested was not, I just know how much staff time it takes for us at the city to set up any kind of, things that are federal requirements are very spendy. So I appreciate the fact that you hooked it to.
I'm glad it was caught.
Absolutely.
Phil?
I guess I would just suggest, because you may be hearing this, HA, as you go forward beyond this, but the program administration costs, if somebody might ask for more detail, how many FTE at what amount, and you probably have all that supports all these numbers, but just I'd offer that.
And I will say, and all of that is speculative. This is a new program, and what percentage we calculated, what the finance staff we anticipate they would need, the outreach for the programs. So what we did is we tried to estimate it at the most efficient, but it would, although we of course look at it in terms of FTEs, it's really not one person or two people. It's several people having different roles that would then charge directly and explain what they were doing, so that when we report, we know exactly how we use those dollars administratively.
David? I think Sherry.
I guess just to, last point on the administration from me, I actually really appreciate the fact that you brought it out on a separate line, because when I look at something like this, I'm always looking for the buried cost, what's buried, under each one of these, and I like the fact that you brought it out, put it right out there and highlighted it, so that we understand what the overall cost is, as opposed to an accounting cost, for lack of a better term, so thank you.
Sherry?
So should you not spend that amount of money that's been budgeted, is there a plan, where would that go? And then if you run over that amount, do you just eat it, or is there a way of adding to it?
No, you cannot add to it, but what I will say, and that's with the administration costs, but with all of these projects. All of these projects require quarterly reporting, and then at the end of that period, there's a reconciliation. How many of these projects did you complete? And some of these projects may or may not be able to be completed within that time frame. Any dollars left over have to be reported back to the state, and they reappropriate them. So they come back here, so you would know from prior years what's the dollars that are carrying over in addition with the new dollars, And they have to, if we're gonna keep them in the same projects, we have to submit a list to you and prioritize them and include those dollars once again. So we don't get to just absorb them or not account for them. And yes, to answer your question about, should we go over? That's an additional cost to LTD. So, and of course, the general fund is limited too, so that's not, so it's important that we manage these well in advance before it's like, oops, we went over. Like anything else, you manage it in the front to prevent that from happening.
So I have Sarah, then Phil Barnhart.
And is that what the reserve fund is for? If you were to go over, you would start out by taking that from the reserve?
No, typically, you would not use it in that way. You would, reserve dollars normally have a legal requirement when you use them. Once you put them into a reserve, you have to meet a criteria, and our finance director is not here. But the policy, we have an adopted policy that states under what conditions can LTD use its reserve funds. Now, these reserve funds are restricted reserve funds because they are only to, but they still would fall under the LTD policy that you have to, the board have had to declare some reason. And I think it's an emergencies. Anybody in finance here remembers the wording?
Yeah,
but there's
it's
like
in here.
strict criteria when you use a reserve fund. And that is language that's typically, if you, once you call it reserve, it's in adherence with the state's budget policies.
So is that risky to put that much into the reserve because it could have been spent on some other thing?
Not really, because this is the first time. That means in future years, we would probably just reappropriate this. And the goal would be that it is equal to LTD's policy, in which we typically maintain 2 to 2.5 months worth of reserve. So in case of an emergency, those dollars are used, and we're using those dollars to protect all of it. Mm-hmm. So it could be to protect bus service, it could be to protect the subsidy program, it could protect any of it. So if you look at what that little dollar is actually protecting, mm-hmm. it's not the percentage that's required to protect. So probably in a subsequent year, we would just reappropriate the same dollars. We would not ask for any more, or we would ask maybe for the difference up until you reach that threshold, and then you just always keep that amount to protect it all. And then when you do have that emergency, that's when you use it. And you hope you never have to, so, yeah.
Thank you.
So I have Phil Barnhart,
Yes, that's been answered.
All right. Other questions or comments, thoughts? How about priorities?
I don't think I disagree with anything LTE has outlined as priorities.
So then it becomes a question of where those bottom two projects fit into the.
And they're so small in relatively speaking.
Yeah, yeah. That could be a justification for making them number 1 or making them number 7 and 8. Phil?
Well, given that the Project 13 for South Lane Wheels is kind of fundamental to them maintaining their service, I wouldn't put that as a 7th priority. I'd keep that as a number 1 alongside the number 1 priority for LTD, for sure.
Okay, there's a suggestion that we make that one the number 1 on the list. Other thoughts, ideas?
I'm sorry, which one is number 1?
Increased bus service.
Okay.
But the suggestion was to move the transit demand plan for South Lane Wheels above that.
So you put South Lane Wheels above the increased bus service?
Or alongside it, yeah.
Oh, okay, or alongside, I see, yeah.
Sarah?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of putting all the ones,
Yeah.
just kind of in a
Category?
flat, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or putting the number, the transit demand plan for South Lane Wheels and the Florence Eugene public transportation route, right after LTD's increased bus service and youth and low income fare programs. Then put those other two.
So Carl, do you think the board could handle that level of ambiguity?
Yes. It sounds like there's rationale to that, so.
Yeah. So we have a proposal to make all the number ones, number one priority.
That wasn't what that's what I was saying.
Say again?
I was saying, leave LTDs number 1 and 2 as the first two.
Oh,
And then
I'm
put the others right below that.
Okay.
So they would be
Splitting the ones into
threes.
1 and 2. Is that right?
Have number 1 be increased bus service for LTD, have number 2 be the youth and low income fare program, have number 3 and 4, you know, kind of, I guess, I don't know which to put ahead of the other, the transit demand plan for South Lane Wheels and the Florence Eugene, that last little bit. It's only $16,000 for that route.
So I'm still unclear, Sarah, about what you're suggesting when we get down to number 5 on the list, for example.
I didn't go that far. I'm saying, I'm just saying to insert these two, project 13 and 11, insert those after project 1 and 2.
I see, I
So make
see.
those 3 and 4, make
They
3 and
become
4,
3
5
and
and
four.
6,
Okay,
make
okay.
5 and 6, 7 and 8.
And the others
Okay.
out there.
Now I get it. Thank you.
I didn't, I'm sorry, could you just.
So number 1 would be increased bus service from LTD's.
Right.
Number 1 would be that. Number 2 would be the youth and low income fare programs from LTD, which is, those are their order of 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then after those, move up the,
Number 3 would be
Number
South
3 would
Lane.
be,
number 3 would be the transit demand plan for South Lane Wheels. And number 4 would be the Florence Eugene public transportation
And then number 5 would be
route.
rolling stock.
Number 5 would be rolling stock, yeah.
6 would be mobility as a service.
7, the sustainable
I understand what you're
services,
saying.
the reserve, and 8, the
I can
administration.
support that.
The reserve would be number 8.
The reserve would be number 7, and the program administration would be 8.
That seems unambiguous, and I don't have any work to do.
Yeah.
It seems pretty workable.
Well, we have a proposal in front of us. Comments, thoughts? How about a little straw poll? Okay, it sounds to me as though we may be getting close to being ready to approve the project as proposed in the order that Sarah proposed, and I assume you have that written down. Does anybody want to have any more conversation before I ask for a motion?
I just, the way that LTE laid it out is usually, it's, you know, seen these in the past, they tend to know what they're doing. So, one project goes into the other and they have to have one, you know, if you look at them, you can't have one without the other in some of these cases, so I think if we split it up and there is a lack of funding for one of these further down the road, for like number 5 gets moved to 6 or what have you, it has a potential of changing that third plan that they've laid forward. Where I think if we could go with keep the number 1s as 1s and leave them up, you know, as a priority here. Cause it's not that much money that these other two, that are asking for. So if it's doable, why not leave them up as number 1s and leave the order that LTD has requested, because that's, there's a lot of planning that goes into what they ask for. So I know that, you know, there's some method to their numbering there. And I just think that, that might be, the best way to go.
Thanks, Josh. And David Devine?
Just to comment on that, I think we are keeping LTD's priority the same in their order. We're just taking the Cottage Grove and the LCOG proposals and inserting them elsewhere in there.
Right.
And that's really, but we're not changing LTD's ranking, we're just moving two projects ahead of 3, 4, 5, and 6 from LTD, and those happen to be this Cottage Grove project and an LCOG project. That's what I'm seeing as, I mean,
Yeah, that was what I was
that's what I'm seeing
gonna
you
say
do.
as well.
That's what, effectively, that's
Is
what we're
there
doing.
different-
And remember, we're getting these on a proportional basis, so that if we're only getting 90% of the dollar, it's not like everything 100% goes to the top one, and then the rest of them get 0. they all get cut proportionately, so, I just think it's a clear 1 through 8, I think is a nice.
Sherry?
So I just had a question about the 130%. Are we voting on those as well? Okay, so that's what I thought. So my question being that if we looked at those in conjunction with the 100%, I mean, the state is projecting that there's actually going to be more money than the 100% that was budgeted originally. So I'm looking at those two projects totaling 116,000, which is out of 300 million, for the others, some of the others are in the millions. It doesn't seem unreasonable that we would put them as 3 and 4 in the listing of priorities.
So I'm hearing a leaning toward the Sarah proposal. Anybody want to make a case for Josh's idea? Or a different idea? Okay. So is anybody ready to make a motion?
Amy is, I can just tell.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gary, way to read the body language, good job.
Okay.
That prioritization that Sarah proposed.
Okay, and to adopt the projects
Yep.
as proposed. So the motion is to adopt the projects in the priority order that Sarah identified for us. Kate has that written down. Any other discussion? Was there, Sherry, did
I
you
will
second it? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Abstain.
Okay, understood. Ruth abstained, Franny abstained, Carl abstained.
Josh, are you voting on this? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, now, do we need to vote on the 130 today as well?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
The nice thing is the end district only has one, so you just have to say if you just have to say if you're okay with more service or more buses for LTD for end district. That one doesn't even require prioritization for end district.
Okay, so shall we take that first set is in the LTD, looks like.
So I just have a question.
In district, yeah. Sherry.
So the operating assistance, what does that mean? Is that what I'm looking at? Task 1?
It means more bus service. So
It means more bus service? Okay. Why didn't they just say more bus service?
Expanded bus service.
Expanded bus service, okay.
I understand that. Phil.
Well, I'd like to ask about the other part. Does this, replacing 40-foot buses, is that contemplated that those will be electric or something else?
We did not put that to be electric buses at this point. They were hybrids, electrics.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I think it's an error for the bus service to be depending upon buying new equipment that will be operated on fossil fuel, given the warnings that we've been given by the fourth climate change assessment report and the international plan on that we received in October. We've already heard today that these buses last about 18 years, and that's way past the time that we can be putting carbon in the air, according to those reports. So I think that's a problem. Now I understand where it comes from. This understanding of the situation we face has changed a lot since the beginning of October, and so plans that were underway before that are obsolete. But I would urge the board to do its very damnedest to only buy fully electric buses that do not require any fossil fuels for the future, because it's just simply too dangerous.
Phil, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I just noted that on project 14, page 21 of our packet, criterion 4 is marked here as having 69 and 60%. I guess having met those criteria, that's the one, procurement of buses that are powered by natural gas, electricity, or other low or no emission propulsion for use in areas of populations more than 200,000. Is the percentage that's provided here just based upon kind of making everything come out to 100%? Or is it, yeah, I mean, it's like, they would be hybrid electric vehicles and not some percentage that's all electric and some percentage that's hybrid. Is that correct?
The application that we submitted was for hybrid electric vehicles, and these dollars, as we submitted the application, would match federal dollars. So it's not that, so the vehicles themselves are hybrid electric.
So if you
Yeah, I mean, going forward, so we're in the process of working with our board on a long-term plan for sustainability. And so out of that will come, you know, how our fleet looks like in the next 15 years. And so, so that's why we have options involved in those.
So I would assume that, you know, if you did go, say, all electric instead of hybrid electric vehicles, you know, some of these numbers might be adjusted a little bit in the dollar amounts under the replacement vehicles, maybe year over year, or there could be some adjustments between how much operating assistance and how much is in the replacement vehicles, correct?
No, well, they're intended in the category that we put them in. And in the future, as Mark was saying, as we establish some sustainability goals, we'd hope to transition our fleet to all electric or whatever the latest technology is at the time. When we submitted these applications, we submitted them with the thought that this is like a 2-year, a biennium, and we did not feel that we would be able to bring in electric vehicles and meet the requirements. We currently have funding for a total of 11 all-electric vehicles, and we have one on property in the last 3 years. So in 3 years, we've only been able to get one on property. We hope, of course, that those procurement would be expedited and we would get the remaining 10 within this 2 years. But then we thought that these dollars for this set may not help us get that. But as we then have a sustainability program that talks about how we're going to reduce our emissions, we thought in future years we could then bring that. But we do agree that we cannot continue to just use diesel, even partially diesel buses. But we kind of did it in mind with this biennium and what we felt we could deliver at this time.
So AJ, are you saying that if you had the money to buy electric buses, there would be no way to get them here?
We have the money for 11 and we have one, and we've had the money for 11 for 3 years, and we still only have one. We just can't bring them in fast enough to purchase them. So our goal would be that during this 2 years, we would get the remaining and have a total of 11. At that point, when we reapply for these dollars, we would have a clear sustainability program that explained how we would accomplish that. But without having that in mind, we didn't want to just submit it just because it looked good, and then in 2 years you're sitting here and you're looking at the same money again and we haven't moved any further. So we were just trying to be realistic with our plan as to what we could deliver to the community.
Did I see a hand waving over there in the?
Well, I was hoping just to make a comment for the good of the order, and I think what AJ is saying is consistent with this. The maturity of the electric bus market just isn't there yet. It's a nascent market. There's one battery electric bus that I think is reliable and can be delivered in Terra, and one manufacturer doesn't really make a market. I think there's some that are on the horizon that are promising. You just have to wait, and this might be the right time.
I've got Sarah and then Phil Barnard. Oh, then Carl.
So if a procurement miracle or technology miracle happens and and it is possible to procure those more electric buses than the 11, could this money be spent on that, or do these have to be hybrid electric?
Well, we have 2 years to spend these dollars. If within those 2 years, we haven't spent them in this way with the vehicles that we need today to do the expansion, then we would probably bring back a plan at that point of how we would replace them. Yes, if electric vehicles had evolved to the point that we can bring them on board, once they are operating well, they're actually highly reliable. And we anticipate reductions in maintenance cost as a result. So yes, it's to our advantage to go in that direction. We were just providing information here that we knew was realistic.
So could, if the market makes big advances in the 2 years of the, within 2 years, could this money be spent?
We'd love it.
Okay.
We've got 10 buses that we still need to bring on property that we have dollars sitting there. So,
You have to understand, the time of turnaround in any bus is about 2 years.
Oh,
So
okay.
even if we ordered it today.
Got it.
we wouldn't- In perfect circumstances, we wouldn't see it in 2 years.
I see.
So.
yeah.
Carl, then Phil Barnard.
Thanks. Phil, I just want to acknowledge as, president of the board, I fully heard your comment, and we are very much in support of electric vehicles, and we're going to do it as much as we can. But I appreciate AJ and the staff also saying that there are obviously challenges with that, but we have our full commitment towards going all electric.
Yeah, this conversation, it illustrates yet again how difficult it's going to be for us over the next decade to get from the economy we have now, based primarily on fossil fuels, to an economy based on renewables. It's going to be very, very hard to do it. The discussion and the presentation about the difficulties for the Lane Transit District is just a microcosm of the bigger problem that we have to do what Bob Dalpelt suggested in his comment in the Register Guard a couple days ago, and that is we need a major mobilization of our entire economic resources in order to make the transition in the time that we have. If we had 40 years, it would be different. We don't. So, I mean, I completely agree with the point you're making. I'm really gratified by the comments I'm getting from the staff and the board about what your hopes are, because those are my hopes too.
And I do want to say, for the vehicles that we put in the first application, in the 100% list, and some of them we have for vehicles replacements for mobility on demand, staff knows that there are available electric vehicles for that don't have. So in that way, it allows us to make some headway on electric technology. So that is the direction we're going on all the smaller vehicles, is all electric. So where we could, we are doing it.
So are we prepared to make a motion on the 130% in-district proposal? Yeah.
I'll make a motion
Thank you,
to
Amy.
approve the in-district proposal as presented
At the 130%
at the
level?
130% level.
Seconded by Sarah.
Could you read them again, please?
Okay, it is conditional mobility improvements, operating assistance, which is expanded bus service is what I understand, right?
That's correct.
And then replacement of 40-foot buses.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the motion. No need to prioritize. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And I'll note that there were 3 abstentions. I think we know who they are. Okay, now we have the 130% out of district and a proposed prioritization. So is there discussion on those items?
Could I just
Sherry.
ask a question, Kate? On page 21, that was project 14 that we just voted on, is that correct?
Yes.
It states that it's the 100%, is that just a?
That's just an error.
An error, okay. So
No, that's in district. That's why it says 100%. The percent
was
in
it,
district.
were we just voting on?
You were just, that it's happening in district.
Oh, in district.
100% of this funding.
130%.
But it's the 130% list, yes.
Thank you.
I know, it's, there's a lot of things.
Not imagine. Okay, it's because on the next page, when we're looking at the 130%, it's 130% out of district.
You're right, which is confusing. That one's the error.
Okay.
So in the out of district, what we have is priority number 1, Rhodey Express service expansion. Number 2, we have.
How's that different than the Rhodey Express?
It's at the 130% level.
It's more expansion,
This is more.
greater
Got it, got it,
expansion.
got it. Sorry.
So, number 2 is Rhodey Express expansion vehicle, to provide the vehicle.
By another bus.
Yeah. And then number 3 is, reserve.
Yep.
So those are the 3, priorities, the 3 proposals.
You can't do the expansion.
And in that order is what they were proposed.
No, yeah.
Discussion? Sarah?
These ones are all LTD, so I would say that, as Josh was pointing out, they've thought about this. Leave them in that order.
I see a lot of head nods. Does that mean we're ready for a motion? So the motion should include approval of the projects and at the 130% level and the priorities.
I move to accept the proposed projects in the priorities stated for the 130% out-of-district STIF funding.
Thank you.
Second.
Second by David Devaney, motion made by Sarah. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And I'll note that there were abstentions from Franny, Josh, and Carl. Now, our next meeting is scheduled for March 5th, and we will have, before March 5th, proposals for what are the 2 categories, Kate?
The State Transit Network, which
State Transit Network.
which is federal 5311F funds,
And then the
plus the
discretionary is the
intercommunity
other?
funds. They fall into that category, and then also the discretionary funds from STIF.
Okay.
So,
And those are gonna, remind us again what the process for that is. It's a little different from the formula funds that we've been working with.
there we go. Yep. So they're a little bit different because these applications went to ODOT directly on Friday. And so ODOT staff are now reviewing them, then they'll send any projects back. Again, this is similar that any public transportation service provider could have submitted a project proposal to ODOT. And then anyone that that comes into Lane County at all will get sent back to staff. And then you all, on March 5th, will send you the packet. They'll have the list of projects that have been presented to ODOT. And you all will say yes or no, whether or not you think each project should be funded. And then you have the option to prioritize if you would like to prioritize. And you have the option to make comments about the projects if you would like to make comments about them. But the
we're
only
not
thing,
required to prioritize.
you're not required to prioritize, so. So I'm expecting, ODOT said that they will send that project list by February 15th. But to be honest, I don't even totally know right now which projects have been submitted to ODOT, so.
Have you told us what the total dollar amount is gonna be for these 2 categories?
I have told you it is around 11 million for each pot of funding. That's an estimate,
Okay.
between 10 and 11 million, I believe, for each pot of funding, so. But that's an estimate, and I have it somewhere.
So, is there any other business that we have to conduct? So you'll send that out to us as soon as you receive it. We'll be planning to meet March 5th, 3:30 here, and we'll have the material before that meeting. Sherry?
So just a quick question. So for the projects that we've approved today, they're going to go to the LTD board, and then what is the next step? Do they go to Metropolitan Transit Authority, or?
So they will go to the LTD board, at the March board meeting, and that will be a first read-through, and then there'll be a 30-day public comment period, and then the LTD board will formally adopt them. I guess the LTD board, if they had any questions, they could come back to you after that March meeting and ask you all to meet in April to discuss anything, but I'm not sure that will be necessary, and then they would formally vote on it at their April board meeting. That application has to be submitted by May 1st. And then if you look.
Submitted to
ODOT by May 1st. And then if you look on page 2, you'll see the formula fund process after we submit. So in May and June, ODOT will review, then the Public Transportation Advisory Committee Subcommittee will review in July. In August, the Public Transportation Advisory Committee reviews and recommends. Then that goes to the Oregon Transportation Commission, and then they make a decision in October, and then hopefully those funds will be dispersed by November.
Okay, goodness. So, just quick, AJ, so for instance, the student passes will be coming out hopefully in this coming fall prior to the actual funding being released, is that correct?
Yes, the goal is, so we will begin our public process for the fare subsidy. We're required to also public notice that if we're gonna have a change in our fare policy, which this would constitute one, we'll put that out for public comment, same thing. The board will then come back and make a decision. Our goal is to implement that in the fall, which would be September.
Okay.
So that means, although LTD would subsidize it for a few months, it's not that long of a period. It's within the fiscal year, and it's just a typical cash flow issue.
And you recoup.
Yeah, to recoup.
Bill Farrington?
Kate, the Public Transportation Advisory Committee, Subcommittee Review, that is an advisory committee of the OTC?
Yes.
No, that's an advisory committee, which is a committee of ODOT.
PTAC is an advisory committee to the Oregon Transportation Commission?
No, sorry, Public Transportation Advisory Committee is an advisory committee to ODOT.
Not to the board, to the
Staff.
administration.
To staff.
Yeah.
Okay. But they're selected by OTC or?
The PTAC?
Yeah.
PTAC has a set of bylaws that outlines the representatives, and then they're appointed by, by.
I think it's.
Are they statutory? Maybe they are. In which case the legislature did it to you. I mean them.
Kate, is there a chance you can track down the answer to that question?
Yes, I will track down the answer to that question before the next meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
I believe in the rules, it is written in the rules that there's an advisory committee. I don't know if PTAC's normal provisions, but for these rules, PTAC is supposed to get these applications before OTC gets the applications. And they can kick them back, which I think you guys just kicked some back recently. So they, at that point, they are performing a duty for OTC according to the rules of STIF. I don't know about the other pieces, but I know for STIF, they are required to come before an advisory body before OTC.
So the PTAC Review Committee reviews the recommendations from ODOT staff. And then if we want to, we can reject or approve. And then that recommendation goes to the full PTAC committee. And then that committee again does another review and they can approve. And then the PTAC committee takes that directly to the OTC.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a partial, I think, answer that you're asking, Kate, is that PTAC supports the Rail and Public Transit Division of ODOT as basically our vetting body for staff. And in the construct of STIF, they are performing a function that supports the OTC. Ordinarily, the presentations are directly to the OTC, but we have PTAC as sort of our vetting body, just our something to take a temperature because in some instances staff gets in silos or in some cases doesn't have all the information they need to inform good decisions. So we have the benefit of that body to assist us.
Thanks. Do we have any other comments or questions before we adjourn? Well, we did a lot of good work here tonight and for the last week, so thank you so much for your service, and we will be back on March 5th.
Thank you.